Hello and welcome to Steps for a Successful Database Migration. My name is Thomas LaRock, head geek here at SolarWinds, and joining me today is Kevin Klein. Say hello, Kevin.
Hey, Tom. Hi, everyone.
As I said, my name is Thomas LaRock. I am a head geek here at SolarWinds. I have over 20 years experience, various roles, and yes, I enjoy working with data, probably too much to be healthy, really. Kevin, a little bit about yourself.
I've been in the business a bit longer. I started in the mid-'80s and have worked on everything from 8086s and 286s all the way up to big mainframes and, of course, the standard stuff you find in the data center in the shop that you work at today. I also do a lot of writing and traveling in normal circumstances. So hope we can talk about that at some point. And also, I've written a lot of books. My best known book is SQL in a Nutshell.
Yes, I'm willing to bet a lot of people watching this are familiar with SQL in a nutshell. So also, people that are watching this have probably fallen into this category where they may have tried to migrate an application or a database to the cloud, and they have found themselves in the situation of migrating back. According to one of our recent IT Trends Report survey, more than 35% of all IT pros have indeed migrated apps back from the cloud.
And that process is called repatriation. It's not just focusing on anything you move to the cloud, but we're talking specifically about apps.
So we know database migrations are difficult, but we also know that they don't have to be. And Kevin and I are going to walk through 5 areas of focus that we believe you should have, that if you concentrate on these 5 areas, you're going to find your success rate for database migrations to go higher. So let's get started. Let's dive right in. So the 5 steps. Number 1, cleanse your data and code. What do we mean by that, Kevin?
What we're talking about is 2 separate things, of course, with the data and the code. But one of the things you have to keep in mind about moving to the Azure cloud or any cloud is that you pay for what you use. And so if you're moving obsolete data, let's say from 12 years ago, that doesn't even show up in reports or trending, why would you want to migrate that? Even if it exists in the database, it might be time to reconsider that. You may want to just archive that off in case you need it at a later date. And in the same way, you want to do an analysis of your code to see if there's any technical debt that with a very light touch might be enough to change it, update it, so that you don't have to carry massive amounts of this older, more obsolete code that doesn't perform as well.
So once you've gone through that process of trying to clean your data and your code, and I always like to tell people nobody goes to school to be a data janitor, but yet here we are. Next is you're going to want to assess your entire data estate. And so what do we mean by that, Kevin?
Well, one of the things that you'll find when you talk to database people, developers and DBAs and things like that, is that especially if an application has been around for a few years, at some point down the line, they created something called a linked server and connected so that their queries on this SQL server can talk to that SQL server over there. Or perhaps there's multiple layers where there's a staging server the data comes into, and then some SSIS jobs that move it to production, and then there's some other jobs that move that data over to an Azure Synapse database or maybe an SSAS data warehouse. You have to have all of that mapped out in advance, because if you begin to move things and you don't have that mapped out and planned in advance, you're going to start making customers, your internal customers, very upset when things start changing around and don't work the way that they used to.
Yeah, those linked servers are remote servers, as we used to call them back in the old Sybase days, right? All those little things, you think it's all just magic. Everything just seems to work, but you get surprised by those hidden dependencies.
Exactly.
So the third step here, we say basically get your benchmarks, which is very general term, but I think it's important to have an understanding of, what benchmarks and baselines are we really talking about here, Kevin?
Yeah, we've always said as monitoring company that you're looking for anomalies, but if you don't know what normal is, how can you decide that this is abnormal behavior? Now, that's very important in any kind of monitoring situation where you want to make sure your mission critical and business critical applications stay up and stay online. But where this becomes especially important when we're doing migrations to the cloud is you can get the performance that you want in the cloud, but there's always a trade-off. And it's possible that you had built your projections based on one set of assumptions, but when you go to the cloud, it turns out you actually have to turn all those performance knobs up. And you have to give it more memory, more CPU, more storage, and you pay for every single bit of that. And so that's why a benchmark is so crucial in a database migration, that we would put it as one of the major steps here. You have to know what normal is in order to have any idea whatsoever to control costs. So it's crucial for when you do your database migrations.
Agreed. So, seeing what you just mentioned about knowing what you must pay for, one of the steps that we talk about is essentially optimizing for cost, which is slightly different than what we might be used to as database administrators or data professionals. Usually we optimize for performance, but in this case, we're going to focus actually on hard dollars, correct?
Absolutely. The philosophy, the mindset, I guess the better word would be, is that when we purchase servers and things like that to support our database applications, they have a sunk cost. So while they may be extremely expensive, it's possible that the price doesn't come up again for 2 or 3 years, depending on how the corporation amortizes those costs. So, the big boss signed off on the capital budget and spent $400,000 on servers, but then they don't see that again forever. However, with the cloud, you see that bill every month. And so if the boss's boss or the C-suite walks in with a bill in their hand and they say, how can we be spending $40,000 a month on this? Even though in aggregate that adds up being less than what we were worried about, our costs being, it's that it hits every single month. And so you need to spend a lot of time and attention as an architect or as the person responsible for a migration, knowing what your costs will be in advance. And on top of that, how to set up some guardrails so that you don't have cost overruns and things like that in the future.
And last, but definitely not least, we talk about testing for data fidelity. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, this is a shortcoming that we see in a lot of projects in which database migration happens to the cloud, in which what happens is the DBAs or the development team say, I'm responsible for the technology, not so much the business side of things. And so they leave it then to the business owners, to the subject matter experts of the application, but not of the technology, to do all the testing and make sure all the numbers come out. Now, that's essential. You want to do that. The reason we add this to our list here today is we do have some products and tools that will help you do that more efficiently and, in fact, even automate some of this. So we want to make sure you know that there's some easy ways that you can control that as well.
That's great. It's definitely an important step. So, Kevin, we had started by talking about cleaning your data in your code. Maybe you could walk us through what that looks like with some of the products we have.
Naturally, there's information inside of a SQL Server database as to what is being used. Some data may not be used at all. Some data may be used all the time. However, in SQL Century, we actually give you an entire interface that shows you those sorts of bits of information. So at the bottom of the screen here, we see a number of charts that are showing us details about indexes, how fragmented they are, whether they need to be rebuilt or reorganized. And over here on the right-hand side, if you were to click on a specific index above, it will show you how many and what kind of activities happen on those indexes. So it's possible that you might have a clustered or non-clustered index, something like that, that hasn't seen any use at all. Or it may not have seen any use on a specific partition if those partitions were divvied up by time. So, hey, no one's done anything to the 2008 partition for a long, long time. So our tools make that very, very easy to see. Now that's in SQL Century. We have another free product, very, very popular product for query tuning. And this one also allows you to see similar sorts of information here. And what we're looking at in the lower right corner of this screen is the statistical histogram for the distribution of data across this index. And again, if we were to see certain buckets of this histogram being very lightly or not used at all, this makes it a quick and easy way for us to identify whether perhaps we have some data based on date or whatever other factor that could be archived rather than migrated to the cloud. And in the same way, Plant Explorer also enables you to see whether queries that you have are particularly poor performing. And so you might, again, give those a quick touch, maybe change a subquery to a join, for example, to get better performance out of it.
Now, let's say that we've gone through and we've examined the data and we're looking for areas where we can improve. As we say, there's really two ways to go to the cloud. There's lift and shift, there's move and improve. Sometimes there's improve before you move, which is really what we advocate here. But there's also the assessing the estate. And of course, for that, we have a product here called Document.
Right. Well, one of the things we always want to have as a mature institution of functioning organ of our enterprise is to have a good data dictionary. But we actually want to go a level higher than that. And this is especially important when we're doing a migration. We talked about linked servers and remote servers. So we actually offer this data mapping, data dictionary product called SentryOne Document. And one of the things it does is it enables you to see all the different ways that your data-centric applications interact and have interdependencies upon one another. So in this case, we see there's the wide world importers database. We've got some reports on a reporting server. We have some SSIS or Azure Data Factory jobs that are running on it. We have another database called WWI SSAS. So we know that that's a data warehouse. That's the high level connections we may not have seen before. We may have only been thinking about SQL Server, but it turns out we've got SSAS, we've got SSIS, we've got SSRS. Now we can use the same tool to go a level deeper and see all the ways these entities within the database interact. For example, I'm looking at a stored procedure. Perhaps I found that with Plant Explorer. And note that I need to update it. And we can say, okay, look at all the tables that this particular object interacts with. So this procedure depends on all these other tables. And then even lower, we can say within that table, within a specific column, I want to know everything that this column is used by. And so we can see that there are tables, there's procedures, there's views, there's quite a few things that this particular column touches. And so now we have a full map of our estate, the entire set of SQL servers in our enterprise, as well as Tableau servers, Power BI, all kinds of different things like that. And so we can tell, oh, if I want to migrate this one application, I actually have to touch 5 different servers to make it happen.
Right. I often found that to be I call that the surprise. Like, oh, you didn't know those were related, did you?
That's right. And boy, is it hard work. It's arduous toil.
So talk to us about the benchmarks and baselines. Like, how are we going to get that done?
Yeah, and this is the set of features in SQL Sentry. There are different ways to get the same kind of information from other tools that we have in our portfolio. But just quickly, baselining is built into SQL Sentry based on that idea of if you don't know what normal is, how can you get alerts that are accurately telling you something is abnormal? So we have that built in, and you can see that right here in the center of the screen where we can choose different baseline time periods. I want to compare what's happening right now to this time yesterday. And there's also custom ones. You can define your own, maybe the busiest day of the month or things along those lines. And you can display them here on your screen, everything in between this band of pink kind of dots, if you will, shows you what your high water mark is, your low water mark, and you can see the average as well. And in fact, you can even set your alerts to fire not on a specific threshold, say 90% CPU. You could say, send me an alert whenever CPU is 2 standard deviations off from normal. And for that particular server, it might be 65%. So, something weird is going on, even though it's not really a crisis level of CPU utilization.
I want to talk for a minute, real brief, about one of the features inside of DPA, Database Performance Analyzer. There's not enough time in this short little session here at Ignite for us to talk about all the features. So if anybody's looking for more of a deep dive into any of the tools that we're talking about here, just let us know, and we'd be happy to help you with that. But I want to focus on what we call our table tuning advisor, because you had mentioned earlier, Kevin, about the ability to look at the indexes that maybe aren't being used, or partitions that maybe are empty and inefficiencies there. So a lot of times in performance tuning, what I see is a method of, oh, this query is performing poorly. Let me fix this query. Oh, I see, it's an index. Let me fix that index. And what you have here is, you can see, we highlight for you, and this is information that you can get from any of the DMVs, right? It's just saying, here's some index recommendations provided by the engine. And you can see down below, we have information about the table itself and all that. But over here in the upper left, I want you to look at this: inefficient SQL queries on this table. In other words, if you touch this index, there's a chance it could affect 75 different queries. So it's a different way, a different mindset, where you're thinking to yourself, hey, before I make this change, what's the real impact? Now, this could also be a good thing. You're talking about the cloud, because imagine making things better for 75 queries. Now, imagine making things worse. So for DPA, we put this feature, and I say it's taking those index recommendations that the engine gives by default and just doing a slight pivot and saying, hey, let's focus on the table itself as a whole, the scheme of the table. And if you're going to adjust one thing inside an index, what's the real impact you're going to have throughout?
Absolutely. In fact, those recommendations that come from SQL Server are based on a single query. So like you said, they don't really take into account the entire workload, which this does.
Yeah. Another aspect is, when we talk about having a database migration to the cloud, a lot of times, obviously, for obvious reasons, the tool set you have is probably the tool set you're going to have when you're in a cloud or hybrid environment. But there's a problem with that. And that is, at this point, Kevin, you and I are old, experienced enough to have been around with these database tools for a long time. These tools were built in a time when a database sat either under your desk, at your feet, or in your data center, and there was one node. But today, these databases are globally distributed. And as a result, the way you want to approach tuning for these types of databases is slightly different. This is why the rise of what they call the 4 golden metrics have come about. That's your latency, throughput, concurrency, and error rate. These are the metrics you want at a high level for any of these globally distributed databases, because that tells you basically where to go next. You don't want to spend any time trying to tune a query or read an execution plan if you know that, hey, wait, really the issue is throughput. Maybe I just need to add a couple of nodes, right? Your code could be as efficient as possible, and hopefully is as efficient as possible. But you're going to need a different way of investigating inside the performance of these particular engines. I also want to show, so this is a different tool. This is called Database Performance Monitor. And not only do we highlight those golden signals for you, but we don't leave you high and dry. Just as with any of our other products, we have recommendations for you, things to check, best practices, advice on queries that could use maybe some index love here as well. So between a lot of the products that we have here, we're really well positioned to help anybody with any type of database migration, whether your destination is Earth or cloud. We've got a way to help you get that done.
And as always, with the cloud, a lot of people lose track of the fact that when things don't perform as well as they could, when they're not tuned as well as they could, you have to spend more.
Right. And so, as you said, performance has a cost. Know it in advance. We actually have a free tool we put together. We worked with Microsoft on this. It's called the Azure Cost Calculator. And you can see in the left, it has various filters there, right? So one of the ones I look at is the orphaned resources. As people are familiar, if you delete a VM from Azure, you don't necessarily delete the disks. And those disks can have an associated cost with it. That becomes one of these orphaned resources. So this is a nice way to break out, by resource groups, subscriptions, and types, and all this information to figure out where you actually spending your money. And again, completely free. You can download it today and really help make sense of your Azure cost billing. So last, Kevin, we had talked a little bit about how to test for data fidelity. Can you walk us through this tool?
Yeah, so it exists in 2 forms at present. You can use it as a Visual Studio plugin, or you can use it as a portal. And what this does is it provides you with a whole raft of different kinds of automated testing you can do against your data sets. Testing for data fidelity is a very important lesson learned we've had as we've built accumulated knowledge about migrating to the cloud. What we've discovered is if you are taking, let's say, an on-premises database, Earth database, and you run one of the tools like Import-Export Wizard and Management Studio and move all the data to your cloud database, it's not uncommon for the numbers to change a little bit, believe it or not. And so it's extremely important for those mission critical and business critical applications that you double, triple check all of those reports, all of the different monetary calculations and things like that. Traditionally, that's something that all the line of business subject matter experts have to do. But here we have a tool that you can get as either a Visual Studio plugin or as a SaaS portal, and you can do all of these tests at scale, automated. So you can run all kinds of tests on all those things and just give those line of business authorities, people who are paying for this project, you can give them the assurances that everything is going to work as well as it ever has now that you've moved it all to the cloud. And once you've done that, your project is ready to be signed off on and put into production.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks a lot for taking the time with me today to walk through the successful steps for a database migration. I want to thank everybody that stopped by to watch this video. If you're interested in learning more about our products, head to solarwinds.com/products. There should be a link in the show notes for you for the specific products that we called out during this presentation as well. And I thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.